In our clinic, when explaining the layer phenomenon to new staff, we often compare it to painting over the same spot. I've observed from my staff that when they try to get perfect results, they would scan and rescan the same area. But this actually causes inaccurate data. So I always emphasize that the key is a simple scanning movement, because there is less clutter.
Hello everyone, welcome to our Please Solve Me webinar. I am Dr. Kyung Jang, the host of Please Solve Me.
Hello everyone, this is Chaeyeon Lee. I am a dental hygienist and the host of this webinar.
It's been half a year since this webinar started. Thank you for your positive feedback. We will continue to strive to produce useful content. The theme of Please Solve Me for the main session is Modest Crown and will consist of 3 questions. All 3 are very good and important questions, so we will explain them in detail today through actual cases and videos. For the 3 questions, we will discuss why that happens and then present ways to overcome this through solution videos. We are confident that this will be a helpful webinar on modest crown treatment. So let's get started.
What is the best technique to get accurate scans of the contact areas?
This is the first question. Mark asked what is the best technique to get accurate scans of the contact areas on the adjacent teeth. Mark asked a really good question and elaborated on why it was hard for him to scan the contact areas. Sometimes he would need several passes to scan the margins, but this would lead to the repeated scanning of unintended areas. So he is worried that the layering of the data would give inaccuracies in contact areas when doing modest crown work. This is actually true. So let's talk about how to solve this. First, we will take a look at some users' comments. Actually, Mark answered his own question, and other users, including me, agree. Adriano gave an excellent reply, emphasizing the importance of using the lock function and communication with the rep. Just to add to this, I posted our detailed protocol in response as well. I explained my method in 5 steps. On Facebook, this was written as a text reply, but today I would like to explain it in more detail through pictures and video. Chen, do you have any tips to actually scan the contact area?
I do a pre-scan first and then always cut out the contact area before starting the final scan. When performing a final scan, I simply scan the contact area in one sweeping motion, and I use the lock function to prevent layering.
Oh, I see. Actually, I discovered scanning protocol by analyzing a video of Chen scanning, like how athlete would review game tape. Chen's scanning technique has become the gold standard at my clinic, and all staff members are to follow this protocol to save chair time. I am confident that following this protocol would make your scanning more efficient. We have prepared a solution video on how to do this. Let's watch it together.
In his question, Mark was worried that unnecessary layers in the scan appeared in the data. As we all know, data being added onto the critical parts can give inaccurate results for modelless crowns, especially in the margins and contact areas. In our clinic, when explaining the layer phenomenon to new staff, we often compare it to painting over the same spot. I've observed from my staff that when they try to get perfect results, they would scan and rescan the same area, but this actually causes inaccurate data. So I always emphasize that the key is a simple scanning movement, because there is less clutter. This is a sketch I draw for my staff showing the sequence, and I'd like to share it with you. When I draw this path, I never lift my pen once. It is drawn in one continuous line. In the same way, the entire part of the prepared crown could be obtained with a single uninterrupted motion. There is a lower chance that layering occurs, because we scan in a 3-dimensional motion, so some points or lines could overlap, and layering is hard to avoid in some areas. In addition, in order to achieve sufficient data of the green color in the reliability map, rolling motion is required, but if the motion is excessive, layers may also occur. We need more than just a diagram to standardize the scanning sequence. So, we made a protocol that every staff member can understand. 1. Determine the target of the scan, margin, contact. 2. Like a sniper, decide on the order of target sequence. Focus on one target before going on to the next. 3. Set the appropriate focal length and perform the primary scan in a continuous movement as uninterrupted as possible. 4. Analyze primary scan to see which areas need supplementary scans. After locking properly scanned areas, focus only on the areas with insufficient data using the HD scan mode. Let's take a closer look at each step. This is the key thing I think about when doing the simple movement. Without a target in mind, your movements become random and inefficient. This can lead you to go over the same areas, which unnecessarily layers your data. We have to categorize specific scanning points like mesial and distal contact and margins, not the entire crown, to precisely process the target. In our clinic, we like to erase the scan data of contact areas already gathered from the pre-scan and start the scan over in the contact area. Step 2. Decide on the scanning sequence of targets. We have already set a target. For contact areas, we recommend completing scan in one shot and locking it so that it prevents layering of these areas. In contrast, it is difficult for margins to get complete data in one shot in practice. So we don't recommend trying to get perfect scan data for margins in one go. Rather, it's better to think of this as getting a rough outline for margins in the first scan. So we often start from the mesial contact and roughly scan the entire crown, ending with the distal contact. Where we start and end the scan may vary depending on the surrounding environment. Step 3. Set the appropriate focal length and perform the primary scan in a continuous movement as uninterrupted as possible. Next, we start the scan movements. We have to set appropriate focal length by considering the length of the crown and the space between adjacent teeth. Then, proceed with the scan in the order of distal contact, body and margin. Mesial contact in the same way as in the previous diagram. The primary scan is performed with the mindset of obtaining approximate data of the entire crown through the spiral movement. But keep in mind, while the body can be roughly scanned, we need accurate data for both the distal and mesial contact points in the primary scan. Step 4. Analyze primary scan to see which areas need supplementary scans. After locking properly scanned areas, now it is time to evaluate the results of the primary scan. If the contact areas are not properly obtained, it is better to completely delete the scan data and perform the primary scan from the beginning. Rescanning multiple areas will only result in inaccurate data. So if you fail to achieve getting what we need from the primary scan, it's better to start over. If the contact areas are well obtained, lock them with the lock function. The same applies to the body and margin of the crown if the data is well obtained. Expose only the part that you think is insufficient so that it can be scanned, and adjust the local length to scan only that part as if you are sniping that area. To do that, we recommend increasing the focal length. HD scan mode would be helpful in this process. When scanning margins, we emphasize that you scan in a rolling motion in such a way that you hit the target from various angles. After achieving green colors on the reliability map for all margin areas, your scan for the modelless crown is finished. The last step is rescanning the areas with insufficient data using HD scan mode. After achieving green colors on the reliability map for all margin areas, scanning work for the modelless crown is finished.
What clinical difference does the blurry effect have on the final crown margin?
The second question is also related to the model's crown scanning. The first question addresses contact areas, and the second question will address how to accurately scan margins and evaluate scan data. Actually, this was a question asked a while ago, but it's a really good question, so I want to go over it today in depth. In the post, this gentleman asked about the blurry crown margin. As he said, the buccal margin is clearly outlined on the scan image, but the parallel margin is located deeper and appears blurry. So, he was wondering if the blurriness would affect any clinical difference in the final result. This may be a concern that many of you have, myself included. So, let's think about why this phenomenon occurs and see what we can do to avoid this. Now we are looking at a case where a blurry margin showed up during a model's crown scan at our clinic. I have observed that these blurry sections appear more frequently among those who are newer to scanning, whereas it appears less when someone more experienced performs the scan. So let's ask our scan expert Chen. Chen, why do you think this blur phenomenon occurs?
First, overall is occurs when the operator does not sufficiently perform rolling motion on the margin area. However, if the margin is deep, we cannot be avoid the blurring data no matter how hard we try. This is not because the steps are unskilled, but is the problem with the given skin environment.
Oh, I totally agree with you. Rolling motion is clearly an important technique, and there are differences in skill level between staff for sure. From a technical aspect, turning on H scan mode and scanning the same object from various angles makes the data more clear. However, the suboptimal margin will always be hard to scan regardless of how experienced the person scanning is. For example, in the case of the suprachiasmal margin located on a dental model, clean data can be obtained without any special scanning technique, but these results rarely happen in practice. In reality, scanning is not that easy. So, we have a solution in the form of a video. Let's have a watch.
The blurry margin? Where does it come from? It was asked if the blurry margin has any clinical difference on the final results. In our opinion, there are several reasons for why blurry margins may appear. As we discussed, the blurry margins could result from inexperience in scanning, but the biggest problem is attributed to a difficult scanning environment, such as deep margins. Now, let's find out together how to scan a crown with a deep margin. We have narrowed down the causes for the blurry margins into three main culprits. Let's talk about culprit number 1. Let's simulate the situation of scanning the deep margin through this diagram. We can immediately notice the main obstacle in the picture, which is the soft tissue undercut. No matter how much rolling motion is attempted, the scanning light goes straight, so it is difficult for it to reach the shade area hidden by the soft tissue undercut. In this situation, the margin scan data cannot be sufficiently obtained and will appear blurry and ambiguous. If the dental technician uses this blurry data to make the final prosthesis, the margin gets set incorrectly, and a crown with an ill-fitted margin will be produced. The best way to prevent this first culprit is to create a crown with a supragingival margin, because this will completely remove the possibility of the soft tissue undercut. As we well know, in the case of the supragingival margin, the scanning light is not obstructed, so scan data with clear margins can be more easily obtained most of the time. However, a supragingival margin is not suitable in all cases, and especially in cases where deep subgingival caries previously existed. The formation of a subgingival margin may be required. In this case, we would recommend scanning after using a provisional restoration for around 1 to 2 weeks. I want to show you the reference article that inspired me. The author modified the provisional restoration margin by adding flowable resin to better the environment for scanning, allowing more light to enter, which resulted in a more clean scan. So this is the method that I like to use, and it has helped me overcome the blurry issue in subgingival margins. Otherwise, we can perform a gingivectomy around the crown margin to remove the soft tissue undercut. I like to use a portable diode laser to perform gingival trimming, because as the name suggests, it's portable, so it's always ready for when I need to scan. Even though this is less invasive than conventional electrosurgery instruments, some patients still feel it's a bit invasive, so I use this only for necessary areas. My methods involves trying my best to insert the retraction cords first, evaluating the soft tissue undercut using a photomirror, and then deciding if laser gingival trimming is really necessary. If so, I will carefully perform this in only the essential select areas. We believe that the second culprit is moisture, as seen in my diagram. The margin surface could be moistened by gingival crevicular fluid or saliva within the oral cavity. This can distort the scan data by causing the scanning light to reflect in different directions. Think about how our face is reflected by the water surface in a pond. Saliva can be controlled through the cotton roll isolation method or suction, but this cannot be done with gingival crevicular fluid. The buildup of gingival crevicular fluid is unavoidable if scanning takes a long time. Therefore, in order to minimize scanning chair time, we need to move quickly as if trying to complete a timed game mission. So we set some rules to follow at our clinic to control the moisture issue as much as possible. After performing a pre-scan in advance, we can prepare for the final scan by trimming the data of the target area. Once we have the patient biting down on the gauze, we can then approach with the mindset of processing the target as quickly as possible, like an assassin going in for the kill and fleeing the scene. 2. If an assistant is available, ask for help. If an assistant helps with retraction and moisture control, a good environment can be maintained during the scanning procedure, and the operator is able to use both hands for scanning. Using 2 hands makes it easier to control scanner movement, so it is especially advantageous to use a rolling motion, and scanning can be completed more easily and accurately. 3. Use this magic item. This is what Dr. Kim introduced to us. A dry surface can be obtained by applying a hemostatic agent called dry Z to the gingival margin and applying pressure with a cotton ball for about 2 minutes. In particular, we always use this item because it almost perfectly inhibits the flow of crevicular fluid, which cannot be done by other moisture control methods. If you follow these 3 rules, you will be able to complete the scanning mission in a dry state and obtain clearer margins. The third culprit is related to the second one, moisture. But this time, the distortion is caused by light reflection from the wettened retraction cord. Over time, the cord absorbs gingival crevicular fluid, retains this moisture, and expands in size. In this case, the swelled cord can obscure the margin border, and light will be reflected by moisture in the cord, definitely resulting in a blurry effect. So, properly inserting the cords is an important factor, which relies not only on technical skill, but also on the selection and combination of cord types. My method involves inserting 2 cords at the same time and scanning without removing them. Therefore, the suppressed fluid does not suddenly rise to the margin surface. I prefer to use the combination of cord number 00 and 0 together. When we use this combination, the second cord can be located at the same level as the gums, and you may worry that it may not be distinguishable from the margin. But the scanner can tell colors apart unlike the stone model, so the technician has no problem distinguishing the margins, even if they are at the same height. However, the important thing to keep in mind is that if you leave the cord inserted for too long, it will absorb moisture and swell like a sponge. Therefore, as emphasized earlier, it is necessary to complete the scan mission as quickly as possible after inserting the cords. A video of Dr. Zhang preparing a crown and Chen scanning will provide additional tips to understand how to overcome the deep margin issue. Let's have a look. Crown preparation is a really important step, so Dr. Zhang spends quite a bit of time making sure the margin is at the desired level. To do this, he first designates where the margin level should be using a club-shaped burr. After establishing the margin depth, he likes to use the electric handpiece set at a low speed to reduce the axial walls while maintaining the initial depth. In this way, although it's a bit more time-consuming, it definitely creates a better scanning environment in the subsequent steps. Chen places the utmost importance on the scanning environment, which includes having all the scanning items ready to go, having well-trimmed scan data, and even making sure staff are on standby to help. After everything is set up, only then does she start the final scan for modelless crowns. You can see how smoothly she performs her scanning movement, using a rolling motion to ensure the margins can be scanned from various angles. In this way, she can get the best scan results, minimizing the chance of blurry margins. Blurry margins, 3 culprits, and how to resolve them. This is a summary of the 3 possible causes for blurry margins. The blurry effect introduces uncertainty into the crown manufacturing process and will have a negative impact on the final crown result. Therefore, we must prevent or minimize the blurry effect. I want to reiterate that if you feel you are having a hard time getting clear margins on the day of crown preparation, there is no need to obsess over doing the scan on the same day. It's totally okay to schedule another appointment for scanning, and you will more easily get accurate data for sure. This video outlined these 3 causes and their respective solution. We hope this video gave you confidence in scanning modelless crowns. This answers question number 2.
What's the best way to avoid surface artifacts and edge smoothening?
This is today's third question. This question led to a lot of discussion this month with over 40 replies, so we really wanted to address it here. Gabriel asked about a phenomenon when experimenting with his newly bought scanner. He created his own experimental model and performed a test scan. Gabriel discovered when scanning abutment models in vitro, margins didn't appear in their original form in the final scan data. He noticed that the margin being transformed into round shape, and he wanted to know why this was happening and how it could be prevented. He also asked if there were any specific settings that would be help with this. This is a very good question. Let's summarize what was asked first. He wanted to know where to mark the finish line when you get rounded margin, why these artifacts on the surface were happening, and lastly, if we could share an example of a high magnified image of the shoulder or sample margin. Chen, do you have any input on this?
Yes, sometimes I feel as if the margin resolution is low, especially when the margin are thick.
Oh, I see. Then let's take a closer look. Why does this phenomenon occur? Let's watch our solution video together.
Gabriele's own experimental mode. What happened there? To summarize the problem, the scanned image of the sharp margin data was altered into a rounded shape. When we use a scanner, our purpose may be to obtain data as precise to the actual shape as possible. As Gabriele asked, if the scanner cannot capture the margin as it is, we need to know exactly why this phenomenon occurs. When I first saw the picture he posted, I assumed that post-processing only occurred at the margins in the software, similar to the die trimming process of the stone model. For example, like the overbite phenomenon we mentioned in the March session, I wondered if there was some automatic processing in the software to clarify margins. If that is the reason, you might get a rounded margin, even when you have obtained sufficient margin data. However, I did not think that the scanner would specifically recognize the margin area and perform post-processing automatically. In particular, when looking at actual patient cases, such rounding was not observed. So what was happening in Gabriele's experiment? So we asked the expert that we thought would know this best, Dr. Kim, of Ask Dr. Kim Anything. His answer was very clear. Scanned data actually looks like that when it is enlarged, so there is nothing to be concerned about. When I heard this for the first time, I didn't understand what he meant. He explained this using an example where he draw a circle on large grid paper. He told me that, in the exact same way, when scan data is extremely enlarged, the margin edges are not expressed as right angles, but instead appear round. Honestly, I was not quite sure what he meant, but he said this was a common sense, so I was too embarrassed to ask for clarification. I decided to research this answer myself. I was able to find one research article that explained this phenomenon. Let's see what it said. They start by explaining the concept of mesh density, which is essentially the resolution of the scan data. If we use the density as seen on the right side, we will get much detailed resolution in our scans. However, the file size would be exponentially larger, and more importantly, this would not affect the clinical acceptance range. It means if you set the mesh density high in the final scan data, the results can be made to look sharper. However, because the difference has little effect on the clinical outcome of the final prosthesis, the scan software is, by default, set to display the scan data in medium resolution. And you can see that the margin area is manually prepared by hand, so it has a more complex geography, which would not be precisely reflected in the scan data under the default resolution setting. A high-density mesh is needed to precisely display the emergence profile, but a low density would not pick on the complex curvature, therefore it results in the smoothening of margin areas. The scanner is able to display high-quality detail that we want it to, but because it's not necessary, it does not. Simply put, this is because what we are making is a prosthesis, not a nano-sized semiconductor chip. Then, what would be the width of the round margin observed by Gabriele? If I had to guess, I would say it is within several micrometers, which would put it in the range where no difference can be recognized clinically. Then, what is the range of preciseness that a milling machine can process? It may vary depending on the milling machine specification, but is known to be around 10 micrometers. In other words, a milling machine cannot reproduce a difference of several micrometers, and we cannot detect the difference in the prosthesis regardless of where we set a margin for the rounded areas. Additionally, this error is much smaller than the allowable 50 micrometer marginal gap suggested in prosthodontics textbooks and the allowable 100 micrometer gap in CID-CAM prosthesis. Therefore, although it may seem worrisome when viewed in greater detail, in reality, there is no need to worry at all. I still don't like the round shape. As we explained, although the round shape would not affect the final result, you may still be bothered by it. Maybe you just don't like it. So, we asked Medit if there was an option to increase image resolution, and they said yes. This means you can actually configure the settings to give you the display you want. This is like adjusting the resolution settings in a video game. It's totally optional. How can we see a clearer margin? Let's take a look at a video that goes through the process. Method number 1. Scan the margin area in HD mode. Make sure only that part is processed in high resolution. Method number 2. Draw margins. Make sure only that part is processed in high resolution. Method number 3. Adjust the resolution of the result in the settings. Watch the video for the method.
Let's start with the new features. High-resolution data processing uses Medit's AI technology to automatically detect prepared teeth for crowns and produces high-resolution data in the area. You can get high-resolution data without any additional manipulation and get sharper data than the previous version. Also, when a margin line is drawn, the selected areas of teeth with a margin can be processed at a higher resolution.
We all know that HD mode is recommended when scanning margin areas. The difference is that, as you can see on the screen now, the margin area is processed separately in high resolution. In the second method, we first set the margin we want to specify through the margin line creation function. And then, it also goes through a separate high-resolution processing. The method 3 is what we covered in the last Please Solve Me session. If you change the default setting to high resolution in advance, the file size will be larger, but we will always be able to get clearer margins. In this way, you can see what you are familiar with. Let's go on to another concern in the question. Gabriele was worried about when a thick margin is formed horizontally, and if it changes to a rounded shape, where is the correct position to set the margin? We already mentioned that this round shape would not affect the result, but we still need to consider which margin type would be most suitable for the scanning process. Looking at other users' opinions, it was recommended to use vertical preparation, saying that the best way to overcome this issue is to just change the crown preparation method. Because in that way, we don't have to worry about horizontal discrepancy at all. In fact, in the case of vertical preparation, the position of the margin is set according to the surrounding gum height, so it is easier to set the margin position horizontally. This is an issue I really want to address, so I will cover at a later date in more detail with a separate question. This is the answer to question number 3.
I know we covered a lot of information today. I hope this all made sense. On the screen are the question card about model's crown that we covered today with the answer keyword. We are glad to have learned a lot of new things while preparing for this session. Hopefully, what we covered today will improve your daily practice. This wraps up the main session of Please Solve Me. We thank you all for being here today. See you next month. Thank you.